Since 1603, when James VI of Scotland had ascended the throne of England, the three kingdoms of England, Scotland and Ireland had been ruled by one dynasty, the House of Stuart. James inherited a tense situation with religion and money the two leading causes of dissension between the Crown and Parliament. In 1639, these issues erupted with a revolt in Scotland triggered by James's successor Charles I's attempts to install an Anglican prayer book on the Scottish Church. The war's cost forced Charles to recall the English Parliament, which hadn't sat for 11 years. But instead of simply granting the king the money he needed, Parliament decided to tackle their grievances. All of this culminated in war breaking out between the king and Parliament. The First War lasted from 1642 to 1646, and ended when the Scots handed Charles I over to their parliamentarian allies. Negotiations followed over the next 2 years as both Charles and Parliament tried to find a compromise, but a combination of Charles's stubbornness and the growing radicalisation within Parliament meant that nothing could be achieved. This led to the battle lines being drawn up again, and a second civil war breaking out. In 1648, the Second Civil War broke out, and it proved to be a rather harebrained scheme. There were plans for risings throughout England and for a force from Scotland to invade as well. Charles was a prisoner during this time and couldn't command his forces, but it is unlikely he'd have made a difference. Poor organisation on the part of the Royalists and a superior army on the part of Parliament ensured that the Second Civil War fizzled out without ever attracting much attention. It did have one severe consequence though. The radicals within the army were furious that Parliament continued to insist that any settlement had to see Charles retained as king. Declaring that Charles was a man of blood and that any who supported his retention were traitors, the army stormed Parliament and forcibly removed those they considered loyal to keeping the king. This event became known as Pride's Purge, after Colonel Pride, the man who led the army in purging Parliament and left a rump sitting in Westminster. It was this rump that decided to break off negotiations with the king and to bring him from Windsor to London so that he may be brought speedily to justice. Once the king was safely in London, the rump passed a bill setting up what it called a High Court of Justice to try the king for high treason in the name of the people of England. The bill initially called for 3 judges and 150 commissioners, but after opposition from the House of Lords, the judges and the commissioners drawn from the Lords were removed, leaving 135 commissioners in total. Of these 135, only 68 would ever actually sit in judgment. John Cook was appointed prosecutor. In an unprecedented move, and one that technically violated the law, Charles was charged with treason against the people of England by using his power to pursue his own personal interest rather than the good of the people. He was held to be guilty of all the atrocities wrought by the Civil War. As if to highlight just how unusual this entire procedure was, the House of Lords refused to pass the bill condemning the king for treason, and of course there was no royal assent. But the rump declared that their decision was valid and pressed on with the trial anyway, with a vote 29 to 26 in favour. The 20th of January was set as the start date for the trial.